business model for independent pharmacists around the province, we look through them and the services they provide to individual Nova Scotians, their families, their parents and grandparents. Many of our seniors, Madam Speaker, are reliant on the services that families or the pharmacists provide, both the dispensing services that we know of that they are paid for through the tariff agreement, but also the other services that pharmacists provide, often at no charge. Whether it's home delivery of prescription drugs to seniors who are not able to get to the pharmacy or not able to easily get to the pharmacy, or who don't have a family member at their beck and call to do pickups for them, or whether it's those customers who use their pharmacy as an initial triage in our healthcare system, that individual Nova Scotian who shows up at the pharmacy. This happens particularly in rural areas where the ER may not be open at the right time. They show up at the pharmacy with a headache or with chest pain, and pharmacists provide an important triage service in doing a quick assessment of the situation and directing that person to the right point in our healthcare system. Madam Speaker, our pharmacies in Cumberland South, like the Ross Anderson Pharmacy in Spring Hill, for example, who have blood testing machines in their pharmacies that are connected via the internet to family doctors in the area. Pharmacies have provided this service at their own expense, and it is a significant upfront cost and a significant monthly maintenance cost to allow people to have their blood pressure checked and other vital signs checked at the pharmacy without the need to actually have a family doctor visit, and then have those results transmitted electronically to their family doctor for further examination. This is another example of the services that pharmacies provide at no charge. I raise this because I think it is very relevant to the amendment that is before us, because pharmacies have asked for more time for a reason, and that is they have to make decisions about what services they provide based on the information they have before them today. They know the effect of Bill 17 on their business. They've estimated a cut in revenues of between $150,000 and $250,000 a year for the average pharmacy. Mr. Speaker, that is a real cut that will result in a real decline in service. Pharmacists will have no choice but to deal with that for months and months until they know the outcome of the tariff negotiations. One of the previous speakers was quite right. We are weeks away from the expiry of the current agreement. We are miles apart. The pharmacists and the government are miles apart in their negotiations. So far apart that the government saw fit this week to cancel the meeting to negotiate the tariff agreement. This is what the pharmacists of Nova Scotia are telling us, Madam Speaker. And the actual implementation of that agreement, historically in our province and other provinces, has taken months to put into place. Members on the government side may throw out an offer that they'll make payments retroactive to the conclusion of the current agreement. But until we have a new agreement in place, until we have a new agreement worked out and implemented, pharmacists have to make decisions about the level of services they provide based on what they know today. And all they know today is the effects of Bill 17. That $150,000 to $250,000 reduction in pharmacy income that they're going to have to deal with. Madam Speaker, we can't afford to have this kind of cut in service, whether it's home delivery or whether it's blood testing in the pharmacies or a triage in the pharmacies, interrupted even for a few months. Imagine the effect on seniors who rely on those services, even for a few months, while the government and pharmacies spend the time that they need to spend to work out a new tariff agreement. That is the effect of Bill 17 in its current form, unamended. Well, the benefit of the motion, the amendment motion that is before us, is that it will align the change in pharmacy revenue that Bill 17 requires with the implementation of a new tariff agreement, so that pharmacists can have the whole picture, so that they can make decisions about the level of services they're going to provide to seniors and other customers of the pharmacy with the whole picture in mind, so that there need not be an interruption in that service. So, Madam Speaker, what I'm saying is that although we've examined in great detail the effect on pharmacies, we should also be mindful of the impact on Nova Scotia customers of pharmacies. The government likes to claim that this will ultimately save Nova Scotians money. It was pointed out repeatedly to the government, Madam Speaker, that the vast number of Nova Scotians who use pharmacare, many of whom are our seniors, will see no savings from Bill 17, as they will reach their cap on co-payments maybe at a different point in the year, but they'll still reach it. In response to that, the government said, well, they're taxpayers, so they'll see the savings as taxpayers. To that, I would ask, which tax is going to go down for them to see that savings? And of course, no tax is going to go down. The government will scoop up the entire savings themselves. So there isn't an individual Nova Scotian, a senior or otherwise, who's actually going to have a nickel put back in their pocket if they're a member of the pharmacare program because of Bill 17. The only significant saver is the government. We're not against that. In fact, we agree with the intent of Bill 17, as does the other opposition party, as do all parties in this House. Lower drug prices, lower generic drug prices are a good thing. Saving the government money through the pharmacare program is a good thing. No one wants to deny those savings to the people of Nova Scotia through their government, or for those that are not covered by some drug plan or other. We all want that to happen. But no one wants to see an interruption in service while the government sorts it out either. It's a very reasonable request of pharmacists and by the opposition parties on behalf of the customers of pharmacists that the impact of Bill 17 and the tariff agreement and the expanded scope of service be lined up. The government has stood up in this House, and representatives have, and they have said the problem is that people don't like change, that pharmacists don't like change, and this represents change. Well, how arrogant is that? Madam Speaker, the fact of the matter is, if the government were listening, what pharmacists are asking for is actually more change, not just the first step, which is the step that saves the government money. They want all the steps, including a new tariff agreement and including the scope of service agreement. Pharmacists are actually asking for more change than the government is prepared to give them. That is the reality, if only the government would listen. And one would think they would have listened, because we had an incredible lineup of pharmacists at law amendments, more than 50 appearing at law amendments or wanting to appear at law amendments in order to make their point, all on the same point. And both opposition parties introduced amendments in law amendments that would have the same effect as this current amendment would have, which is to align all of the changes at once so that no interruption in service needs happen, so that pharmacists can make good decisions about investment in their own small independent businesses. The government member said no in law amendments. We tried again in Committee of the Whole House. The government member said no in Committee of the Whole House. And now we try once again with the amendment motion that is before us. Once again to try and give the government a chance to do the right thing, which is to deliver the entire package of change that pharmacists are asking for that will be beneficial to the level of services that pharmacists provide to Nova Scotians. And I'm hopeful the government will have, in this one last opportunity, will see the error of their ways and agree with the amendment so that we can get that alignment in place before real service levels have to be reduced, even if it's for a short-term period of time. So, Madam Speaker, with those brief remarks, I will just conclude by encouraging all members of the House to support the amendment, to give serious consideration to the consequences of defeating the amendment, to think about not just the pharmacies and the businesses that those pharmacies are themselves, but through them to the seniors and to all Nova Scotians who rely on those services, both the dispensing services and the other services that pharmacists provide. They are an integral and very important part of our healthcare system. They actually provide services that save money in a lot of other places in our healthcare system, like emergency services, keeping in mind we cannot afford an interruption in those services, even if it is for a few months. Madam Speaker, I believe that the amendment makes perfect sense and encourage all members to support it when we get to the vote. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think that's to get me back for calling you Mr. Speaker for a number of times. So, touche. Madam Speaker, I only very briefly wish to speak to this motion. This motion gets to the heart of the primary issue with Bill 17. We have, as official opposition, have tried to move amendments in the Law Amendments Committee and in Committee of the Whole, which would do exactly what the Minister of Health and Wellness committed that she's going to do anyhow. And so it struck us as rather odd that the Minister and the government would not in fact support those amendments at those times, and specifically the fact that, you know, the Minister of Health and Wellness stood up and she indicated, I believe quite accurately, that pharmacists had asked to see the Act and the regulations in advance of looking at a tariff agreement. I think that's probably a fairly accurate statement. However, they did not say pass that Act. They said they wanted to see it so that they could look at this as a package. And instead, what we have is a government that has decided to ram this legislation down the throats of pharmacists and then hold them under a gun to negotiate the tariff agreement. And that is not bargaining in good faith. In fact, Madam Speaker, the pharmacists have asked to be a partner in this. The pharmacists lined up at Law Amendments Committee and very clearly indicated to members of the government that their primary concern was not the reduction in price on generic drugs. It was the fact that their expanded scope of service and the tariffs associated with had not yet been negotiated, and without any guarantee in legislation that this would not take effect until the tariff agreement took effect, that it was unfair, that it could put some pharmacies at risk, but more important than that, that it was fundamentally unfair. Madam Speaker, the pharmacists quite want to support the delivery of health care. They stood here last year in concert with the government as the expanded scope of service was implemented. They stood here and said that we, as pharmacists, will help deliver better health care to Nova Scotians, that we will deliver more timely health care to Nova Scotians, that we will ensure that people have access to things such as routine prescription renewals, blood testing, and counseling. That they would be the frontline healthcare workers for people across this province. That they would be partners in not only delivering more cost-effective healthcare in this province, but better healthcare. And yet now, this is how the government has chosen to treat them. And so the point of the hoist motion today is it's one additional attempt. And is it the cleanest attempt? Of course it's not. And had the government chosen to support our amendments at Law Amendments Committee, or had they chosen to support the amendments when they were introduced again by the member for Halifax Clayton Park at Committee of the Whole, we would not be here right now, but we would be passing this bill with unanimous consent of the House. And Madam Speaker, there seems to be no reason why that I can fathom that the Minister of Health and Wellness would not have chosen to support those amendments at the time, because they were exactly in line with what she said she was going to do anyhow. Which leads us to the question is, how do we trust that that's what the minister is going to do when she won't support amendments that would put that into law? The Minister of Energy just a week ago supported amendments on his Electricity Act to put what he said into law. He did that because what he was saying publicly was what he intended, and he had no fear of putting that into law. He said, "You're right. We should put it into law. It's what I committed to, and I'm not scared of doing that." But the Minister of Health and Wellness, with the almost identical request in Bill 17, refuses to do the same thing. So it makes people around this province wonder whether the Minister of Health and Wellness is going to live up to the commitment that the tariff agreement would be in place before the generic drug prices change. And the two very much go hand in hand. It is why the pharmacists asked to see the bill and the regulations in advance, because they wanted to know, they wanted to work with the government to have an act and a tariff agreement that went together in harmony and served the interests of the government, but also protected pharmacists and protect Nova Scotians, not only in rural Nova Scotia, but across Nova Scotia. And so today, the Minister of Health and Wellness chose not to support the cleanest options for dealing with this issue. The cleanest options being setting this in the amendments to specific dates. Instead, we find ourselves with one last option, which is to put a 3-month delay on voting on it. And Madam Speaker, if the Minister of Health and Wellness is being entirely accurate in what she has said to the House, which is that the tariff agreement would be in place in that time, then we would come back here, and I believe that you probably have unanimous consent for this bill to go forward. It's as simple as that. It would have been easier just to make it part of the bill. But again, we're asking the government to take one last sober second look at this and to recognize the fact that all we have tried to do since law amendments and through Committee of the Whole and today is put the minister's own words into law. Put the minister's own words into law. And a vote against this is a vote against the words of the Minister of Health and Wellness and a vote against the commitment that the Minister of Health and Wellness said her government is going to live up to. There is that's what this is about. It's about putting your money where your mouth is. It's about standing up and saying, I committed, just like the Minister of Energy did, and I gave him full credit for that in third reading. He stood up and he said, you're absolutely right. I made this commitment and we will put it into law. We will amend our bill and put it into law, and I congratulated him for doing that. I thanked him for doing that. And now it's the opportunity. It's been the opportunity at law amendments. It's been the opportunity at Committee of the Whole. We're here with the third option to do this and allow the Minister of Health and Wellness to live up to the commitment that she has made publicly. And I certainly hope that the government will reconsider their opposition to moving in this way, and will support this motion as we move forward today. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's my pleasure to stand and speak to the motion that is before us. Of course, a classic Hoist motion to try to move the whole discussion up a few months, because you know, as we've spoken on many occasions in this House, whether it's in second reading, whether it's been Committee of Whole House, whether it's been at in the Red Room for law amendments, we have been listening to pharmacists. We've been listening to Nova Scotians. We've been listening to long-term care facility when, of course, Bertha Brannon came in and talked about what she felt was going to be the impact upon the seniors in her long-term care home. You know, this is a bizarro piece of legislation, I think, in its really essence. You know, but I can tell you, after 8 years in this House, nothing really surprises me of how things are going to get done, or how they're run through the House of Assembly. You know, this is one of those things that maybe I think the government thought that maybe we would miss something. Maybe the pharmacists are going to be too busy. They're not going to realize what's going on, so they're not going to come to Red Room. They're not going to consult with the opposition parties. So maybe we can ram this one through, and no one would have known. Because ultimately, if you look quickly at the bill, it's something that everybody can support. Fair drug prices for Nova Scotians, more services to where and when we need them, being offered by a pharmacist. So if you look at it quickly, you can say, well, I support that. I really support that. It's a good idea. Let's move it forward. Let's get it done. The thing that we heard over and over and over again, over 50 times in the in-law amendments, is we don't feel that we were consulted. We're too busy doing the work that we need to do to truly say that there was a true consultation happen. We feel that in the businesses that we have, that it's going to be it's too much of an effect too quickly in the model of business that we have and how remuneration, how they're paid to do the work that they do. It's too quick. It's too much. We can't bear it the way you've got it laid out. So we tried, of course, to bring in amendments as well. Those amendments would try to find a way to push the implementation of this bill out a little bit so that a tariff agreement can be negotiated, so that when everything happens, the pharmacist, the small business owner, knows, knows where the money is going to be. How are they going to continue to run that business and offer the services to their communities? How they're going to be able to keep the lights on, keep the pharmacy techs in place, keep the front-end staff, the cashiers, and those kinds of people available. How they're going to be able to continue to offer delivery to either homes or individuals. They're worried about it because of the way things are laid out, quite inconspicuously within this bill. So by putting this motion in to move it out for 3 months means that it gives a little more time to negotiate the tariff agreement. The tariff agreement, there has been some work done on it. We understand that things are still too far apart. Where the Pharmacy Association is and where the government is are quite a distance apart. So there's going to need to be more meetings, more time in order to really hammer out the expanded scope of practice and, of course, the tariff agreement that will pay for it. The member for Halifax Clayton Park talked about the 7-month doing it in lickety split. That was the fastest that any government has been able to organize a tariff agreement. And here we are, 6 weeks away from the expiry of the current tariff agreement. And that's with really no decision on what that tariff agreement is going to be. Then there is, of course, the electronic system that they've got to take that agreement, turn it into billable services, and transmit that to Medivie Blue Cross, which will get it into the system, which, of course, again, takes time. So we're a long ways away from being able to tell the pharmacists, here's what your compensation package is going to be, so that they can say, okay, I can now look at 45% of brand. I can now look at 40% of brand. I can now look at 35% of brand, which is what this bill does, all within about a year. The second amendment that we had tried to put in, of course, was trying to slow that process down a little bit too. Giving these pharmacists maybe 3 years to adapt to the new funding model. Make sure that cut wouldn't happen all at once. So, we've tried all the avenues that has been at our disposal in this House of Assembly. We do have a set of rules that are very descriptive on how our bills, our legislation can be amended or not amended. But what it really boils down to, Madam Speaker, is that we are in a majority government. The NDP have a majority vote when it comes to any votes that happen in this House of Assembly, and therefore can accept or not accept any amendment that comes before it. As we've tried, they voted against what we would qualify as being very sensible, good additions to the bill. But unfortunately, they feel that they need to ram this bill through the House, be darned of anything else. This is unfortunate, because it's really telling the pharmacists, and it's telling small business that, we're going to muck around in your businesses. We're really going to make a difference to you, and we're not going to talk to you about it. We're just going to do it. We've seen that a few times, whether it was Bill 100, really start to muck around in how things are decided upon, how that business model really works. We're really talking about the paving plan that, without any consultation, they're going to change how the paving businesses do the work in the province of Nova Scotia without any or very little consultation. So this keeps happening over and over again, that they're really impacting the lives of Nova Scotians in the sort of the guise of, don't worry about it, it'll be okay. Well, if you went to a bank and said, I need to borrow money to do this to my pharmacy today, we've heard this a few times in law amendments, that because of the expanded scope of practice, that they're going to have to be constructing consultation rooms. Not all pharmacies are a Shoppers Drug Mart that might already have a really nice consultation office built into it. So some of these pharmacies, these small pharmacies in rural Nova Scotia, some of them right here in Halifax as well in the HRM, are going to have to go out and build things. So they're going to be going over to the bank and say, I need to borrow, I don't know, $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 in order to do that kind of renovation. And the bank's going to say, well, I just heard that you're going to have your bottom line yanked out from under you. So we're not going to actually go out and loan you any money until you can get that all organized. So the expanded scope of services, the expanded scope of practice, is going to have to wait until some of those things are actually done. So we're sort of tripping, this legislation trips a whole bunch of things up. It's getting in the way of how pharmacists, I believe, feel that they should be treating their patients, how they feel that they should be parts of their community. So, Madam Speaker, with those few words, I've got to say that I hope the government supports this motion. I hope, because this side of the House, of course, supports it. We'll be more than happy to come back in 3 months' time to see where the tariff agreement process is in place, and to be able to say, good, we support the bill. Let's have a unanimous support of that bill, and get fairer prices, fair drug prices for Nova Scotians. It's a very small thing that we're asking for, and I look forward to this bill, actually getting what it's supposed to do, which is, of course, those fair drug prices. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I too am pleased to rise to speak to the motion put on the floor by the Honourable Member from Halifax Clayton Park, who did a great job of laying out the challenges that pharmacists have and Nova Scotians have with the particular bill that's in front of government. And when I spoke on this bill in second reading, I talked about how I believed it was the government's intent to have the tariff agreement arranged by now before this bill was going to be brought into the House of Assembly. And I acknowledged at that time that the tariff agreement negotiations had been set aside twice, I think, with the agreement of all parties, not just government, but the pharmacists as well. And I also said during that period of time, if that was the spirit and the intent of government at the time, why would they not want to delay the passage of this bill, or at least put a clause in the bill that says this piece of legislation would not take effect until after a tariff agreement had been negotiated with pharmacists in a proper and open way that would make everyone happy. So with this motion that's been put forward by the member today, which speaks about delaying this for 3 months, it really speaks to what was the minister saying was her intent. And that was to have this piece passed, as well as having a tariff arrangement in place, and as well as putting in place a expanded scope of practice. It would only make sense that all of that would happen together. The minister has acknowledged that, has said that in this House, and we would agree with her. So we're trying to figure out on this side of the House what happened. What has changed? Why has she moved away from that position? This motion that is here today, the amendments that we had asked to be put as part of this piece of legislation, the law amendments, didn't change the bill at all. What it talked about was the implementation part of the bill. It talked about making sure that we negotiate in a fair and open and transparent way with pharmacists to deliver their pay package. What are the services that are going to be received by Nova Scotians as they walk into a pharmacy? Those are all, Madam Speaker, things that we should be doing in unison, not in isolation. The member from Dartmouth East spoke about the fact that the minister often has said in this House, not only during debate on this bill, but during question period, that pharmacists wanted to see this bill, and they did. Absolutely, they will tell you that. They wanted to see this piece of legislation so as they negotiate their tariff agreement, as they negotiated their expanded scope of practice, they would have the full picture of what it is and how it would impact on their business. They did not say, they never once said that they wanted the minister to bring this piece of legislation into the House and pass it by itself in isolation. They have openly said, we know things are going to change and they have to change, but we want to have a negotiation that's open and transparent with all of the changes at once. Imagine if we sat down with any union in the province of Nova Scotia, started talking about their salaries, and we were going to change how they did their business, but we did it one piece at a time, and we passed that legislation, and then went back to the table. Who's going to do that? No one does that. It's not right. Doesn't make sense. So why would we do it now? You know, we have said we support the spirit of this legislation, the intent of this legislation. What we've asked for, which has been reasonable, is let's delay the implementation part of this bill until we've had that entire tariff agreement and scope of practice change. Madam Speaker, this is a wonderful opportunity, quite frankly, and it should be an exciting time for communities across this province, really. When we spoke in this House about the expanded scope of services pharmacists are going to be able to offer, that's an exciting thing for many communities. It's another way for us to access health care. It's another portal for us to come into the healthcare system and be able to see better service up front in our own communities. Pharmacists are embracing it. You hear, and I'm sure you hear it in your community, members hear it in their community, Nova Scotians were embracing the idea. Many times we go in now and ask for advice from our pharmacists. This should be an exciting time. Pharmacists should be getting ready to embrace their new role, to get a chance to tell the community that this is what we can offer you. But in the kind of chaos we're in now, debating this bill without looking at what the tariff agreement is going to be and not looking at what that expanded scope is going to be, instead what we have is a lot of communities with uncertainty in them. Pharmacists are telling people who come through the door the challenges that are being faced, and because people are hearing about this on the news. They're hearing about this on the news. And so instead of being part of this exciting new opportunity that is there for many of our communities, what we have is uncertainty. And the motion that was put in today would alleviate much of that uncertainty. The member from Halifax Clayton Park is asking for the implementation to be delayed 3 months. Madam Speaker, that is not too much. It speaks directly to what the minister has said she was hoping to do. It speaks directly to what the minister has said she's going to do. So why not make that part of this bill and allow that negotiation around the tariff agreement to take place at the same time? And equally, and probably more important, Madam Speaker, is to allow communities to understand what that expanded scope of practice is going to look like, what services pharmacists are going to be able to offer, allow them to adjust their business model to do that for communities. All of that should be taking place together, not in isolation. Madam Speaker, it is our hope that the minister will take the motion that is here, encourage the members of our caucus to support it, because it is exactly what she said she wants. This is exactly what the minister says she wants, and that is to have the tariff agreement, fair drug prices, all completed and negotiated at the same time. This amendment will allow her to do that, and Madam Speaker, it will allow communities across this province to be certain that whenever the changes come in around the fair drug prices, it will not impact the services that they presently receive in their communities. If anything, Madam Speaker, it would allow pharmacists to be able to reassure them, no, we've negotiated our entire package, and here's the expanded scope of practice that we're going to be able to offer you in our communities. Madam Speaker, I would encourage members of the government to listen to their own Minister of Health and Wellness when she said it is her intention to negotiate the tariff agreement at the same time with this bill and put it into law so that communities across this province would have some certainty. Madam Speaker, so while they might not want to listen to this side of the House, I would encourage the members of government to pay attention to the Minister of Health and support this motion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm pleased to stand here today and speak on this motion as well. As we've heard from my honourable colleagues, there seems to be unity in our feeling on this matter, and we sometimes wonder what this government is, how much insight they have into in this case, pharmacists and the impact it's going to have on them, and more importantly, Madam Speaker, on the people who use their services all over our province. And I'm going to talk about the pharmacists for a bit, but I also want to make sure that for anybody who's listening, that they understand that the focus of our points are on the end user, whoever it is out there in Nova Scotia who needs to go to a pharmacy to pick up medications for themselves, their family members. This legislation can have an effect on those people. And I guess we have to wonder, I'm just going to go into a little background because I've spoken with a lot of pharmacists. We have a number of pharmacists in my area, in my region of Inverness. And we know that they've been compensated in various ways over the years, an industry that has evolved the way it has. And I know that there was a rebate system in place for them. And that was offered by generic drug companies to list their drugs and encourage local store owners to sell them. And now local store owners depend on that rebate to generate profit. And I know that that local pharmacies are only allowed to add a very small margin on drugs, and the purpose of that is to ensure that pharmacies aren't being rewarded for selling more drugs and more medications, because that would have obvious negative impact. So that is why the drug companies had to find a new way for retailers who deliver their products and medications that we all have come to know and that we need for our health in some cases, a way for the retailers to be able to run their businesses. Because when they turn on the lights in their pharmacy, when they stock the shelves, when they turn on the heat in the wintertime, maybe the air conditioning in the summertime, that all costs money, Madam Speaker. And of course, to actually deliver the service, you have people. We have many Nova Scotians who are working in pharmacies. They may not even be pharmacists, but they may be working in a pharmacy. And their employment depends on really what we're talking about in this bill. And it's another reason why we support the motion to delay its passage and to consider all the impacts that it will have. And so, Madam Speaker, that is a bit of the history, as I understand it, how it's been explained to me from some of my local pharmacists. And I'm happy to stand up for them and for the people that they serve every day when they open their doors to serve Nova Scotians. Now, some people might say that pharmacists make too much money, and I hope that is not the impetus for this bill. That would disappoint me, because I know that, yes, perhaps pharmacists may make more than the average Nova Scotian, but I think we need to respect that They've worked hard to become, to get the training they need to become pharmacists. And Madam Speaker, I can't imagine, Madam Speaker, why anybody would begrudge pharmacists for doing the job that they do. And we saw many of them come forward through public accounts, or not through public accounts, but through law amendments, and many of them have said they've chosen to live in rural parts of the province. They might make a better salary if they were working in urban areas or even areas outside of our province, but they like Nova Scotia. They like serving the people they serve in their communities, and they've chosen to live there for that reason. That is their primary driver. So I don't think we should be begrudging pharmacists for earning a living in Nova Scotia. And, you know, I hope that that is not the impetus behind this bill. But I do know that sometimes we hear things from the NDP government about people who may be making too much money, and, you know, we can't believe they came here and complained about this and drive home in their nice cars. So, and that was a comment that I heard, but I'm not going to debate it here.
Out the door is your next move, Leonard. Out the door.
Order, please. The honourable member for Inverness has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so once again,
Order. The honourable member for Inverness has the floor.
thank you, Madam Speaker. And I hope I guess perhaps I've touched a nerve there, but I'm going to carry on with my remarks. The other thing I think about is entrepreneurs. And when we think about how important entrepreneurs are to our economy and how really they're the people that create jobs for our communities, for people living in our communities. If we didn't have these people, we wouldn't have much of an economy. If we depended entirely on government services to deliver, not to deliver, but to provide jobs for people, well, we couldn't support government because it would just be feeding off itself, and that at some point things would just disintegrate. So we need people who are entrepreneurs in Nova Scotia. And I think about these pharmacists. Imagine taking a chance, spending 25, 30 years running your business, providing a service in your community. Oftentimes, as has been explained to me, the cost of the dispensing fee, and this is one of the reasons why we're asking to delay this bill, because that's under negotiation, but that dispensing fee doesn't even cover the cost for the pharmacist to deliver the medications to the people who go into the pharmacy. So think about that person who took a risk to start their business. They worked hard for 25, 30 years. They've sold their business, but their payout depends on the success of that business carrying on. And now the government comes forward with a bill to change the business model that impacts the revenues of that business. And now that person who spent their life owning and operating a pharmacy and who is now trying to transition it, this bill causes problems with that transition. You know what that affects, Madam Speaker? That affects that person's retirement income. Now, we've talked in this legislature about this government's decisions around the government pension plan to support that. Why don't we think about the people who are taking chances, Madam Speaker, in our economy to create jobs for people? Why aren't we also thinking about them and how our decisions in this legislature affect entrepreneurs? Is it fair to change the business model at the passing of a bill that changes the business model, that destroys the succession plan for a business and destroys the retirement plans of a Nova Scotian who has worked hard, contributed to the economy, provided a service that was needed in their community, all to be destroyed? So that's why I have a concern about this, Madam Speaker, because I think we need to be thinking about entrepreneurs. We need to be putting them up high on the list of priorities. I'm going to be going to a Chamber of Commerce dinner in Port Hawkesbury tonight. You know what one of the questions I'm going to be asking? I'm going to be asking, as their representative, what can I be thinking about doing?
Order. The member from Inverness has the floor.
Madam Speaker,
Just a little loud, folks. Just keep your conversations a little lower. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to be asking those entrepreneurs, what can I do as their representative in government to make life better for them so that they can hire more people? because I believe those are the real job creators, the entrepreneurs, and I always want to be in tune with what they're thinking. Because if we can make life easier for them, we're helping create jobs for Nova Scotians. So that's why I've made the comments I've made thus far on this motion. And I think it's important for us all to have insight into the lives of entrepreneurs. So, Madam Speaker, there's a couple of more points that I'd like to cover here. One of my fears about this bill is that it will create a game of attrition. And what I mean by that is that pharmacies' business models, if they're changed, all of a sudden, some of them are going to die. There's going to be attrition. And those that are left will be still there to serve Nova Scotians. I guess the first question that comes into my mind is it government's role to decide how many pharmacies are out there? Well, I guess if government totally controlled the economy, like we see in some countries of the world, you know, maybe there's only one car for sale in the country, or there's only one product. And I haven't seen any lattice around lately, Madam Speaker, and perhaps there's good reason, because competition makes things better for people. And so when we look at pharmacies, what could happen with this bill if we see fewer pharmacies? That means people have to drive further to get their medications. And I think about in rural areas, you know, people might already have 30, 40-minute drive to the pharmacy. What happens if that pharmacy closes? Because the business model is not quite strong enough. There's not quite enough dollars coming in through the door to keep it open. And the pharmacist says, well, I might have been here for 20 years, but you know, I can't start taking a loss. I think I better just close down the shop here, protect against further damage, and maybe I'll move away. Maybe I'll start another career. You know, whatever the case may be. Maybe I'll try to find a job in government. I know the minister mentioned earlier there's some pharmacists working in government. Maybe that's a safer place to be, Madam Speaker. But I hope that that doesn't happen. So I guess what I'm saying, Madam Speaker, if we have fewer pharmacies, and this is really the thrust of my remarks today, is that's going to impact Nova Scotians. And I think of seniors that are, sometimes seniors can't drive anymore. They can't drive the 30 or 40 minutes. They have to call upon a friend or somebody in the community to help take them to the pharmacy. They probably feel a little bit guilty about that. They might have some reservations, feeling they're putting somebody at inconvenience to take them to the pharmacy. Well, imagine if they've got to drive an extra 20 minutes on top of that. Now the drive is maybe 50 or 60 minutes away. Those are some of the things I'm thinking about, and I think that's why we should be delaying this bill. And I think it's why this government should be making sure that the pharmacists are getting a fair compensation for what they're doing, so that we continue to maintain the service for Nova Scotians. And I think there's opportunity here, Madam Speaker. There's going to be expanded services that pharmacists are able to deliver, and I want to give the government credit for that, for doing that, because a lot of pharmacists, and if I may go back to some of my notes, from a pharmacist I spoke with, he said to me, he said, pharmacists do not always get paid when they act as a backup for a physician who may prescribe a drug that has not previously worked for a client. So the pharmacist may have to call the physician, may have to discuss that matter. The physician may prescribe another medication. At the end of the day, the pharmacist is doing extra things. And time, of course, time in the day needs to be compensated. So, Madam Speaker, with those remarks, and I know there are some other people who wish to speak, so I'm going to take my place to allow them to have their say on this matter. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise on this occasion in support of the amendment, obviously. I think it's it gives me an opportunity also to speak in regards to, my past employment. Many in the House may know that I used to be part of a management team in a large format pharmacy in Nova Scotia in the community of Dartmouth North. So I have great insight into the role that a pharmacist and a pharmacy plays in a community. I have great insight into the positive effects it has on seniors and individuals who rely on the knowledge and service of the pharm techs and pharmacists. I think to start, I'd really like to congratulate and thank the presenters who've come to law amendments, who've taken the time. Like the member from Inverness suggested, these are entrepreneurs. And many of us have to realize these pharmacists who own their own businesses or who own these large franchises pretty much spend 7 days a week managing their businesses. So to take the time out of their schedules to come here and to participate in the democratic process, I think that they deserve some well-due credit for that. And I hope that, I know today we're fighting the third stage to have this amendment put in place in hopes that the government accepts it. But I hope that those individuals who took the time don't feel that their words have fallen on deaf ears, because I think that their comments that they've made have definitely been captured by the opposition parties for sure. I think the importance of the Pharmacy Act and fair drug pricing, I know that both sides of the House understand the implications of having fair drug prices and the impact that it has on our population, and the importance of having medications that our Nova Scotians can afford. So we have an opportunity here, and generic pricing of medications have been discussed across this country for the last number of years. And yes, with my personal knowledge and background, I fully understand the impact of a decrease in the tariff agreement and bringing down the prices of generic medications. We've seen in the past year when the patent was lifted off of Lipitor, the benefits that it brought to the government, the savings of over $7 million, I believe, and we were able to use some of that money to further fund the drug Lucentis. So we understand that when there is a decrease in the generic drugs, the benefit absolutely gets passed on to the consumer. I think the important thing that the pharmacists, Madam Speaker, want the government and the members of the legislature to understand is the actual day-to-day practices and experiences that they go through. And like I had stated earlier, many of these pharmacists, especially in rural Nova Scotia and these smaller pharmacies, they're pretty much watching their business 7 days a week. If they're not working behind the counter, they're in their offices making sure that the bills are going through to the insurance companies. They're making sure that their front store services are up to par. They really work on creating this overall atmosphere in their place of business, and that's a credit, and it's a credit to them because it's a valued service in a community. I know in Metro, in Nova Scotia, we have probably per capita, majority of pharmacies, largest population of pharmacies in all of Canada. That being said, when we look at negotiating a tariff price and the decreasing the monies in the generic drugs, it's been stated on numerous occasions that the benefit to the pharmacists in having these added costs passed on to them allows them to do more in their business. And when we talk about increasing the scope of service, I think that's where the frustration lies with the pharmacists around this province, that they want government to understand that as it stands right now, we're in negotiations with the tariff process. But we're also asking them to embrace the scope of services, which they already have. And I believe right now that there is a commercial on TV from the Pharmacy Association acknowledging the fact that they, in the coming months, are going to expand the scope of practice, which is going to help the government and all Nova Scotians receive better health care. So they are embracing it. I think their frustration lies in the fact that they're being asked to do this, which a lot of them, some of the services, I mean, when you talk about counseling, a lot of the pharmacists try to have other organizations into their pharmacies to do counseling on different days. That is an added value, but at no cost to them up front now. But when we talk about, having the pharmacists and farm techs be able to do injections and the counseling themselves, it's going to come at a cost, Madam Speaker. And their frustration today and over the last number of weeks has been the fact that they have a real fear. And I guess that fear is that the tariff is being negotiated now. They're being asked to expand their scope of practice, which they've embraced, but what happens if the tariff gets negotiated and that extra dollar value isn't in there? They want fair value for fair work, and I don't think that's much to ask. If they don't get that, if they go into negotiations and by July they get a dollar figure that just doesn't add up, Madam Speaker, we will see pharmacists make a decision, unfortunately, because of overhead, because of labor dollars that they put out for staffing. They're going to make that decision that they're no longer going to be able to compete. And I think that's another thing that we have to look at too, especially when we're talking about rural Nova Scotia. With the generic drugs and the money that these pharmacists make off generic drugs, it does allow them to expand and add value to their businesses, which adds value to their communities and to the individuals and customers that come to visit them. However, when we look at competition, Madam Speaker, and we have a province that, we have some of the large box stores, or what we would call in the retail industry as large box stores, such as Costco, such as the Walmarts, who come in and their dispensing fees are much, much lower than you would find in a rural Nova Scotian pharmacy, or even in some of the large format stores such as Shoppers Drug Mart or a Lawton's. And that's a real concern, Madam Speaker, because those large box stores can lower those dispensing fees for one reason. It's almost like a giveaway to get you in the store so that you can buy all their other products that they are making money on. But when you're looking at rural Nova Scotia, the impact that, if these individual pharmacies are going to be asked to do these expansions, going to be asked to do these expanded services, they realize how important it is. They realize the impact and improvement it's going to be on healthcare in Nova Scotia, and for, in particular, the consumer that would come into their place of business, or in the small rural Nova Scotia community that now these folks can come there and get that injection. They don't have to go get the flu shot at the doctor, which isn't going to tie up the doctor or the hospital emergency room, because they're getting that counseling. But if you take away the value of that, and that's where right now they don't have confidence, Madam Speaker, that this government is going to embrace the fact that there's real value in that. And they're already, right now, the dispensing fees, I believe the tariff agreement's at $10.62, which a lot of the pharmacists have said it's, around $4 to $5 lower than it actually should be right now. So they're real fear. And they want to know that the minister's words mean this, coming from her is what the rest of the government feels. And I know there's a lot of backbenchers that, come from rural Nova Scotia. The NDP gained a lot of seats in the last election from the rural Nova Scotia areas. And I believe that they have to be hearing from some of these small pharmacies. Some of these pharmacies that it's been stated that have been in the province and been in their communities for years, 20, 30 years. And the importance of that, Madam Speaker, is that, the consumer that goes there, the senior that goes there have had the opportunity over the years to get to really know the pharmacist. And, I know on many occasions there's times when someone would come into the pharmacy and they wouldn't be able to afford their drugs or all their drugs, the full prescription. And, the pharmacist would, because of the knowledge that they have with this customer, they would take the opportunity and give them the medication that they needed. And when they were able to afford it, then they receive the money back. And that's a real service. But the confidence has been shaken. And I guess that is the real point. Pharmacists today don't feel that the government fully understands that they need this added value. They need this extra income in order to perform the rest of these services. And today, they don't have the confidence that the government fully understands that. And with the large majority, one swipe of the pen, the decision is made, The opposition has made the effort, but this amendment's not going to be accepted, and therefore pharmacists are going to have to live with a deal that that's going to be not an easy pill to swallow, Madam Speaker. And I want to believe that you know, the NDP government does understand this. With the amount of individual members who come from rural parts of this province, I want to believe that that their voices have been heard at the caucus table, that the Executive Council has heard from those members. You know, perhaps many of the members, you know, themselves use these small pharmacies. Madam Speaker, in the last number of years, we know obviously that we have an aging population. And as the healthcare budget rises every year, this is an opportunity. This is a real opportunity to say to pharmacists, you know, you're front line, we need your help, and we value your services and your opinions, and we need your help. But when we ask for help, we have to give something as well. We can't just simply take it and expect them to do this without getting something back. Because, Madam Speaker, you know, in fairness to pharmacists, they have to make money. They're entrepreneurs. You know, there's a real competition out there to have individuals transfer their prescription drugs to the different pharmacies. If a pharmacist doesn't have enough uptake on fill rates, quite simply, Madam Speaker, they will uproot, they will leave, they will have no choice. This is the education that they've paid for. They have families, they need to make money. And I honestly believe that the NDP government will see this. I really hope that they see this, that they get this, because the impact, if they don't, Madam Speaker, is quite simply one that, you know, if we can't get past this, and the pharmacists, once the tariff agreement is dealt with, and we come to a resolve, but they're not happy, I think it's going to be a real black mark on this government. And I say that because we've heard just in this session the emphasis being put on small business. The fact that the small business tax is being lowered, and I know that, you know, the NDP government and in particular the Premier has really made an effort, a conscious effort to embrace the business community over the last number of years. But if we can't resolve this somehow and keep the faith of the pharmacists, these frontline individuals who really, with our aging population, in the next 15 years, increasing and doubling, will play a huge, important role. I believe, honestly, that this will, in the next 6 to 8 months, be a real black mark on this government. It will be a real message to the business community that, yes, on one hand, we're doing this, but on the other hand, as the member from Dartmouth East suggested, we do not bargain in faith. And I know in years past that, you know, the discussions with the business community, Madam Speaker, what business owners want members of the Legislative Assembly know, and some of us in the past, I know there's some members on the government side that have owned their own business. The members of the business community want us to understand what they deal with. You know, turnover rates as far as employments, you know, struggles with getting an employee to embrace the message that you want conveyed to your customer, tax issues. You know, pharmacies have to rely on the insurance companies to process their claims quick enough so that they get those funds back, so that they can indeed pay their workers and pay themselves and again, make improvements in their business. But they can't make improvements in their business, Madam Speaker, if they don't have the funds. The expectations of the government here is, again, I want to believe is one of good faith. And the minister has spoken and has stated that this is something, this Bill 17 coming forward was something that, you know, the pharmacists had asked for. But, you know, again today we've heard that, you know, what they asked for was to see it. They didn't ask for it to be pushed through. And we had an opportunity today to hear the minister in her own words state that, you know, this is something, what she had wanted was in line with what the opposition has put forward as far as an amendment. to do this as a package deal. And as the member of Dartmouth East said, to do it and bargain in good faith. And I know that the stresses and pressures that these pharmacists are under right now, with the expanded scope of practice, pharmacy techs who, in my experience as a manager on the floor in the front stores, have often, fallen into conversations with the customers and the farm techs. These farm techs are going to have to go in and expand their knowledge and certification and accreditation to do some of these services, which is going to come at a cost. But as it's been stated earlier today, it's all the end result is that the consumer is going to benefit. And I think that's where, the pharmacists think that, the government is going with this, fair drug pricing. And that's what we want. We want Nova Scotians to be able to afford their medications. But on the other side, we want business to also be able to benefit from it as well. So it's that give and take. And what I believe the pharmacists see is the government wanting fair drug pricing. But the pharmacists are frustrated with the fact that they don't feel that the NDP government, the members of the NDP who sat at law amendments, fully understand the impact that this is going to have or possibly have on their business if there is not a fair tariff agreement that would add value to their business. They understand they're going to lose on the generic drug pricing. They understand, and I know, as an employee of a large pharmacy, I understand full well, when we used to get our discounts, the benefit to buying a generic over a regular brand and the difference in the pricing that a pharmacist would make off a name brand drug is very little. So that's where their benefit is. And they understand that, let's say the years of making these what some would believe as large profits off of it. And if we simply think that, as was mentioned by the member from Inverness, that all these monies are going directly in the pockets of pharmacists in Nova Scotia, well, I can tell you, Madam Speaker, that most business owners, if they're able to make money, we want them to make money. We want them to be successful so they stay and they employ more. But they also take that extra money and they put that back into their business. Madam Speaker, the request today is to have a delay. The member of Clayton Park, I think, had spoken quite well to the issues that the pharmacist had brought up through law amendments, meetings that she had held on her own in her community. A 3-month delay would build the faith. I'm not sure if there's any other way, if there's another meeting that's scheduled. We had one scheduled, I believe, in the last number of days that was canceled. I think that would have been a real opportunity last week for the minister and her staff and the government to sit down with the pharmacists and kind of ease their pain and say, look, we see the lineup of people that are coming here to law amendments. We want fair drug pricing for Nova Scotians, but we also value and we appreciate the fact that, obviously we've gotten your attention by the roll call that proceeded through this House. I think that, again, when you think about the pharmacy and many of us who've had to go there, the service that we get, the passion that a lot of these pharmacists put into their business, the importance of the role that they play with many of our seniors and many of our seniors to come, again, with our aging population. The member from Kings West is having a real battle right now in his community with prescription drugs. And a number of us in our communities are battling with that. Well, I can tell you, Madam Speaker, that our frontline pharmacists see that every day. And we talk about our methadone clinics. Well, I know the pharmacy that I was employed by a number of years ago, we had individuals who would come in the morning and they would receive their methadone from our pharmacists. And we've seen the battles that those individuals and the struggles that they had dealing with their opiate addictions. And oftentimes the counseling, the free counseling that was given by the farm techs, the compassion that was given to those individuals and those seniors who were unable to afford their drugs or didn't understand why the doctor wouldn't renew their prescription. The real compassion that the pharmacists and farm techs gave to those customers really, you know, it was important. It was added value at that time. But now, in this bill, and you know, with the fair drug pricing and the tariff agreement coming up and the expectations of the expanded scope of service, all the pharmacists are saying is that we embrace this, we realize the importance of this, we want to be a part of it, but we want to know. We want to know that government and the members of the Legislative Assembly understand how our business operates every day. And I know there's been a show on CBC in the last number of months, Madam Speaker, where they take a political politician and they put them to work in an average job every day. You know, I remember watching one episode where there was a politician that actually went out and worked on a farm one day to see the experience that the farmer actually goes through. Well, I can tell you what these pharmacists had wanted us to understand by coming here, and the 50-plus individuals who took time out of their day and out of their pharmacy and out of their business to come here and educate us. That's what they want, Madam Speaker. They want us to know that they're prepared to take on the challenge. They are prepared to help bring down the health care costs and the budget that has increased for the last number of years and will continue to increase if we don't make changes. They want to play a role. But, Madam Speaker, we can't take from one hand and give to the other. It has to be a fair process. There has to be value for that pharmacist, or we will lose a lot of those young pharmacists who have decided to come to our communities in Nova Scotia, whether it be in the urban areas or in the rural areas. We will lose those pharmacists who have had businesses for 20, 25, 30 years in the communities, because it does come down to brass tax dollars. And we know that the government will benefit, obviously, and the pharmacists understand that. But we can't take from them as well, Madam Speaker. It doesn't work that way. There has to be a balance. So I would encourage the government members to talk amongst themselves, to talk to the minister. I think hearing the minister speak today gave us some confidence. Again, she had stated that you know, this is what she wants. The member from Dartmouth East suggested the member of the honourable member and Minister of Energy chose to put his words into practice and put it into law. And that's what we're asking. Those members that sit on the government side from rural Nova Scotia, you can't tell me that you're not hearing from your small pharmacies. And I don't want to ever see Nova Scotia come down to just the big banner pharmacies, Madam Speaker. And I'll go back to the competition. You know, the Costco's and the Walmarts, who are large employers, you know, predominantly part-time jobs. We need to keep that in mind, that don't always come with a lot of benefits. But those large businesses can take the hit. They can take the hit because they know you're going to come there and you're going to spend money on other items. So it's a loss leader almost. But the pharmacists, the young pharmacists who chose to come here, who come out of school, who chose to buy into a business, who has to pay for their education and pay for the business that they've just purchased, if they don't have the value, not just in the tariff agreement, but the value, the dollar value that's going to be implicated in the expanded scope of practice, they're going to pack up and leave. And that's going to greatly affect all of Nova Scotia. And we will, per capita, have the most right now pharmacies in all of Canada. It will decrease. And we will, again, see another erosion take place in rural Nova Scotia, and I don't think we can afford that. I'll end by just stating, Madam Speaker, that I think, you know, if this amendment doesn't get accepted, I think that the minister should take an opportunity to you know, immediately set up another meeting. I'd encourage her and staff to immediately set up another meeting. The faith has been shaken. I know the pharmacists who've contacted us in the opposition, you know, have appreciated our fight to get government to understand and to hear our points, the points that we're making on their behalf. But I think this has some real urgency, Madam Speaker. We need to hold faith of the pharmacists We need to say we value it. And you know what? I know you're worried now, but our word is our word. And I know over the last 2 years with this government, you know, they've kind of changed their mind. I've seen an editorial yesterday from Jeremy Ackerman talking about a flip-flop of government in regards to third-party funding. We need to hold the faith of the pharmacists, Madam Speaker. So an urgent meeting in the coming days, I would encourage the minister to put that together, to sit down with these individuals and say, you know what, we get it. We heard you. We obviously heard it from the opposition. You can count on us because we need you. But we can't need them and not pay them either, Madam Speaker. It doesn't work that way. One person, one entity can't gain from this. It has to be balanced, Madam Speaker. And with those words, I'll take my seat.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
There he is.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I stand in my place to speak in favor of this amendment. In recent weeks, I've heard from members of my community, pharmacists and their clients alike, who are concerned about Bill 17, deeply concerned about it, concerned about the services that pharmacists will be able to provide to their clients if this bill is pushed through, concerns about jobs in those independent and rural pharmacies that will be the most impacted by this bill. And what this amendment does is it allows the government to take a breather on this, much like we asked them to do in Bill 100, take a step back, engage in some meaningful dialogue and consultation and engagement with those people that are going to be most affected by this bill, the pharmacies, their staff, their clients, and the customers that we all care about and want to support. I mean, it's disconcerting to look at the way this bill has been pushed through this House. We've heard from the minister that those that will be affected by it have been engaged, have been consulted. But according to the stakeholders, to the pharmacists, to the clients, that actually hasn't happened. And we've seen this pattern before. This has been a consistent theme within this government. They'll make a decision while not engaging the people that are most affected by it. This has happened with Bill 100, where a bill was brought through the House quietly, affected a lot of our small business owners, and no small business owners were consulted. We've seen that happen before. We've seen it with education. You know, this government hasn't consulted teachers. They haven't consulted students. They didn't consult the boards before making their decisions to do these cuts to education, and we're seeing the impacts now. Happened with the Yarmouth Ferry. A decision that was made that has had severe and long-lasting negative impacts on the economy of Yarmouth and Southwest Nova Scotia and has affected businesses across the province. No one was consulted. The tourism industry wasn't consulted. They weren't engaged. Small business owners weren't consulted or engaged. Not even Bay Ferries was consulted on that.
That's simply not true.
And this has been the theme of this government. Make a decision while not consulting the people that those decisions are going to impact the most. And what this amendment does is allow you, with this bill in particular, to do that, to do what you said you wanted to do, to have a meaningful dialogue with pharmacists, with their clients, with all the people affected by this bill, and discuss their concerns, their issues, and that way we can bring a bill back that's stronger, that has involved more voices.
Why not?
And that will hopefully reach the goals that this government's intending to do in terms of drug prices, because all of us agree that we want affordable drug prices for Nova Scotians. But what we don't want to happen is to have our rural and independent pharmacies close because of this bill. What we don't want to happen is they pull back on the services they provide to our community members, whether it's delivering prescriptions for free to seniors who aren't mobile, whether it's assisting people through triage in the pharmacy, which alleviates the pressures on our ER system and on our family physicians, which we're short of, as the government knows. And, this is what we want to happen. People are concerned about these things, and from what I get from the government, they don't seem to be as concerned as those that will be affected are. And that's a sad thing. I've received letters from approximately 75 people, I believe. These aren't pharmacists. These letters come from their clients, their customers, our community members who use the services that our pharmacies provide. Over 75 of them, I think, this week came into my office because that's how concerned people are about this bill. And I'll table these letters. I've already provided a copy to the minister directly, and I thank her for taking those. But I think it's important that the House have these on record. Where are the voices of these people in Bill 17? The customers, the clients. The ones who do want cheaper prices, more affordable prices for the drugs, but who are concerned about losing the vital services that they get through our pharmacies. Where are their voices in this? We hear that our pharmacists have been consulted, but the feedback I received from the pharmacists that took the time to come up to Halifax from all over the province, that came to Halifax to present the law amendments, was that they felt the concerns that they presented the law amendments were disregarded by government representatives, that they weren't being heard and that their concerns weren't being addressed, and that this government is moving forward with a bill that will have negative impacts on their industry. And these are small business owners we're talking about here, rural independent pharmacists that have been running family businesses for a number of years, number of generations. We're not talking about the most wealthy in our society. We're talking about people that are trying to make a living out of this, trying to keep their family legacy going, and in so doing are providing such a vital and important service to our community members. These are the people that care. These aren't the big store owners. These are the small business owners that are in our community day in, day out, who have friends in the community, family members in the community, and go out of their way on a daily basis to provide these people with help, with service, in a very meaningful way. And this bill, in its current form, jeopardizes their ability to do that, according to them and according to their clients. And our hope here in the Liberal caucus, and I know our independent member and the third party support this amendment as well. Just to take a step back, take the time to have this meaningful conversation with the people that this bill affects, and bring back changes to improve it. Or at least wait till the tariff agreements are done so that pharmacists can engage in those negotiations in a meaningful way, in a way where all parties are coming together in a position of equal power, because this bill could change that power dynamic in those negotiations. And I hope that this government takes these issues very seriously. They say they do, but we haven't seen action on it. And as I said, this is the same approach that happened with Bill 100, same approach which continues to happen with our education cuts, same thing that happened with the Yarmouth Ferry, and all we're doing is saying, please, this time, this one time, and any times in the future, stop, take the time to engage in a meaningful conversation, listen to the concerns being presented by those that this bill will affect, and please act upon them. And with that, Madam Chair, I will take my seat. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to say that I'm pleased to rise this afternoon and speak to this amendment, but I can tell you, quite frankly, I'm not, because we should never have been this far along in this, what should be a fairly simple piece of legislation, a fairly simple bill. It all looks fairly simple, and I think for the most part, there's a lot of good stuff in it. I think the pharmacists have had their say by way of letters, by way of nearly 40, I think, presenters coming in over the course of 3 days last week, and saying, look, we're not opposed to cheaper drug prices. That's a good thing. We want to see government be able to get the best buy for the drugs that they could possibly get. And somewhere they want to be able to see that savings obviously transferred to the consumer. Now what we do know, there's no direct savings to the consumer. We know when the seniors go in as an example and pick up their drugs, they're still paying the same copay. It's just going to take them a little longer to reach that $4.82 or $4.34, whatever the magic number is. So there's no direct savings at the cash register for those people, and then certainly it does not affect the private plans at all. We're still going to be paying, anyone on a private plan will still pay their prescription prices and their co-pays and their dispensing fees and so on. So there is somewhere down the line a savings claimed. I'm not sure what the number is. We're not sure how accurate the number projected is. But there is a projected savings to government on the purchasing of drugs. Now again, nobody's opposed to that. Pharmacies have made it clear they're not opposed to that. I think most of us, probably in here, all have at least one pharmacy. Maybe some of us more. I have 4, I think. I have the Lawtons, and I have Sobeys, I have the Superstore with a pharmacy, and I have PharmaSave. Now the folks from PharmaSave are the Triders, Carl and his son Jason, and Jason's wife Krista were in, gave a presentation on Monday evening, which was great. They were happy to be here and to do that, and very reasonable in their approach, like all of them are, very professional. It's the kind of people they are. They're wonderful healthcare providers, and they spoke about how difficult this would be on them. And the business model for this current year that they've already budgeted and projected and so on, when it comes to having to make drastic changes and seeing a cut, which could be somewhere in the vicinity of well over $100,000. The question is, how many jobs is that? Well, it might be a couple of jobs. It's not just about the jobs, but that is certainly important because jobs provide service. Provide good customer service in that industry, because most of these stores, as I think we all know, are not strictly just providing medications. They are doing a number of other things, whether it's, well, they provide all kinds of health related products, that's for sure, but they sell everything else going. I think they're almost like a small grocery store in and of themselves, Madam Speaker, and people need to work there and to help obviously with the customer service, but better yet, it's a great employer. These stores are good employers. They employ lots of people, and I don't know of any of them, most all of them, employ a number of people. And I don't know exactly how many, Jason did tell me, but when they were in, they gave a great presentation, as I said, just like all the others did. And it all seems quite reasonable that we would be in no hurry to negotiate, or I should say to resolve the tariff agreement. I guess for some reason it's a big issue. Government is in no hurry to sit down at the table, and if they are, they're obviously in no hurry to come to a resolution from what we've seen. If they were, I don't think today would be that big a deal. I think that they would probably agree and they would say, all right, no problem, we'll hold it off. What's the rush? If it's not an issue, why are we having this debate? Obviously there's something we're missing here, and the pharmacists certainly don't understand it. Maybe we here in this house may, to some degree, not have as clear an understanding as the pharmacists do, but they're very intelligent when it comes to their business models and to the business that they're in. They're specialists and they're professionals, and they're needed. We can't afford to lose one, not one pharmacist, not one store, not one employee. We cannot afford it. We've all listened to job loss numbers in the province being substantial in the last month, and certainly over the last couple of years. We can't have that. We need to keep people working. It's important to keep these folks working. But the services that the pharmacy provides, Madam Speaker, is vital. So, and I think about the importance of that, and I know at Triders, at PharmaSave in Windsor, some of the services that they're providing over and above. Not just because they've been asked to do it, they've been doing it. They've always done it. It's the way they work. And I'm sure it's the same across the province and anywhere else. People are coming in, a lot of folks, the seniors are coming in as an example. We all get a little bit older day by day. We have problems with our vision or our mobility. These folks are not just handing out the thing that they've printed off by way of the drug description and how it should be used and the contraindications. They're actually taking the time with these folks, and they're explaining it all out to them in great detail because they know that that's needed. Some people may not understand when you're dealing with these medications and drugs and contraindications and reactions, Madam Speaker, that continue to happen and can happen. It's important that people understand. It's important that people understand, Mr. Speaker. Welcome back to the chair, Mr. Speaker. It's important that these people understand the importance of how the medication can react with other medications that they take, so obviously how they take it. Pharmacists are spending a lot of time with certain people who sometimes maybe aren't quite as well educated in these things, don't quite understand what their doctors prescribe for them, so they're going to take the time that's needed. But they have a lot of customers. They have a lot of people coming and going. It's just a steady stream, whether they're coming in with prescriptions and having them filled, or whether they're doing the regulars that come in by way of the nursing homes, as an example, perhaps filling every day that are expiring and knowing the renewals are coming up. They're still taking the time to spend with the customer on the floor while they're in the store explaining these medications out to them and all of the things that go along with that, Mr. Speaker. And there's no time to think about losses in staff and not being able to do that. Now, that's all over and above. We're talking about an expanded scope of practice, which could come into place, and a lot of them have been doing expanded things to begin with. Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of time spent doing different clinics and assisting people and referring people. Nobody does it better than the pharmacists because they're probably the most educated when it comes to drugs, more so than doctors and anyone else. Now, Mr. Speaker, we talk about the loss, potential loss of these pharmacists, and government says, oh, there'll be no losses. There should be no losses. Maybe I'd hesitate to say that it's not important to government. I think it's very important to government what the pharmacists do, because I know that all these members have them as well. And nobody would ever say that the job that they're doing is not in the best interest when it comes to this legislation of everyone concerned, because I believe that the intent is exactly that, although it's not being portrayed. And to hold off, every one of those presenters, Mr. Speaker, came in, they gave a similar presentation. The ask has been the same, our emails and follow-ups from those presenters, our emails and follow-ups from family and friends and consumers and people that use these facilities, people that are paying attention. And it's great that they are paying attention, because we are getting asked questions on the street and in coffee shops and, you know, about different things going on here in the legislature during the session. A lot of it, some people don't even know we're here, but you run into it and they'll ask what's going on, and you'll start talking about maybe a couple of bills that are important. We've been talking about the Elections Act and the changes that could potentially be needed and will come forward, and people are interested in that kind of stuff. They're certainly interested in things like pharmacies. Well, what will happen if the drugstore loses people, or what will happen if a drugstore closes? Fortunately, in my area, like I said, we have 4. It may not be quite as harshly affected, although one loss of any would be detrimental to people in the community who have gone there for years and years and years and years. There'd be transfers that would have to happen of information and so on like that, quite potentially. I know in other areas, Mr. Speaker, where they're more remote and there may only be one pharmacy for many miles around, it would be quite detrimental to lose staff and or pharmacies that could close. Totally, it sounds like, oh, well, it's overreacting perhaps. I don't think so, because when you're talking $100,000+ out of a potential pharmacy on the way that they're doing business, that's a lot of money, and that could easily sink any business the way things are today, Mr. Speaker. It just could happen. And I know from where you come, Mr. Speaker, and beyond, there are pharmacies that are out in rural areas where there are only one, where I'm sure that they are concerned. And I'd be very surprised if anyone were to tell me that the local pharmacy in your area that you represent probably hasn't submitted documentation to government saying, look, this is a reasonable thing. We don't mind the bill. We think it's a good idea to negotiate this stuff. We've been looking for a new agreement for some time, Mr. Speaker. We don't disagree with better drug prices. We would like to see that happen. There's a benefit to everyone, in their opinion, when it comes to cheaper drug prices. But the big word here is fair, and it's interesting this bill is called the Fair Drug Prices Act when it's anything but that right now, when there's no room to move on this negotiation. All they want is the tariff agreement in place, which does make sense. They would see that as being very fair. You should know how you're going to make your money when you're in business. It certainly doesn't make much sense to get into the business if you don't know where your profit margins are, or survivability margins these days, not so much even profit margins. It's about being able to survive, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps a lot of them will be affected and they won't be able to survive. But it has to be stressed at how much they're doing, what they're doing, and it's the number of people that they're helping, but it's who they're helping. A lot of these folks, I know from where I come from, there are a lot of folks, and probably a lot of areas in rural Nova Scotia where we're seeing more seniors, and I forget what the numbers are, but we know those rates are growing up demographically and rising. And there certainly will be more seniors. We're all working our way there. I know you are, Mr. Speaker. We're all working our way toward hopefully living long and being happy and healthy and not needing too much as we move along. But we'll always need our drugstores for simple things, and some of us will need them for more. And Mr. Speaker, we need to make sure and we need to assure that they're there and that they're being treated fairly, being paid fairly for the work that they're doing and the business that they are providing. We can't say enough about that piece of it. It's not something we can just say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if, you know, we lose 1 or 2 jobs here. It's only 1 or 2 jobs. It doesn't matter. It matters a lot, Mr. Speaker. It matters a great deal, because we as seniors, when we get there, and certainly the seniors now that are going in there as an example, or people who maybe are having some challenges by way of their mobility getting in and around, sight challenges with their vision, who can't quite read them little pill bottles or understand fully. There are people, unfortunately, whose education may be not quite as good as others, and certainly even the average fairly well-educated person doesn't stand all the ins and outs of those drugs and those prescriptions, and if you're taking more than 1 or 2 or 3. Now, there are a lot of people, and I know from my previous experience in healthcare, Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of times when I would go on an ambulance call and I would go into someone's home and I'd pick them up and they have a whole variety of problems, and you get them all out in the stretcher and somebody come out, don't forget this. It was a grocery bag that was half full or more of pills. Can you just imagine how that would all end up being mixed up? One mistake, and in some of those drugs, a very small mistake can mean a great deal, maybe a life. How important is it to keep these people in place, these pharmacists, these men and women who are specialists in that field, not only not interacting, but having the knowledge? They spend a lot of time, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, they spend a lot of time preparing these medications, the information that goes along with them, and teaching those patients how important it is to have drugs on time and what the potential reactions are to them, or interactions when you have more than one medication, what could happen, signs and symptoms, what you might see, Mr. Speaker. So it's too important not to treat these folks the way they should be treated, fairly, for the work that they're doing. We can't afford to lose any. There's a lot of stuff that we don't think about that these folks are doing. When that doctor writes that prescription, it's easy for him or her. They can grab that big blue book. It's got every med in it and is updated annually, and they look it up and say, okay, what would I do for this particular thing? These doctors all know what those drugs are, but they're still using this big manual to verify the dosages and stuff like that when they're writing their prescriptions. Then it's passed off. It's no longer their responsibility. It's off to the pharmacist. That's where the greatest responsibility lies, Mr. Speaker. Preparing it, assuring they know what they're doing with it, assisting them in numerous ways, Mr. Speaker, on how to care for themselves. I don't know how many, but there's a lot. I know the nursing homes, just as an example, I have 3 in my area, right off the top of my head, that are all looked after by a certain drugstore, or 2 or 3. Maybe they all have a contract with the 3 of them each. There's a lot of patients in each, as we well know. We all have these nursing homes with great numbers of patients. Almost all of them. It would be a rare case where there wouldn't be someone on medication in one of these long-term care facilities, Mr. Speaker. So somebody has to manage the system. Now, these pharmacists play a huge role in places like that, Mr. Speaker. A lot of these drugs are bubble packed. That's done at the pharmacy. They go and they make sure that everything's right. A lot of times, even if you're not in the nursing home, but they look after those folks. But even people that aren't in nursing homes, people who are failing a little bit at home, who are having more difficulties as they get older, or a little confused. What am I taking and when? I've seen pharmacists spend time helping them set up Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on through, and the pills going in here. And this is how these little boxes are used, so that there are no mistakes. That's extras. Pharmacists don't have to do that. They're not getting paid to do that. But they're doing it because they're good to their customers. They know the importance. More importantly, they know the importance of what would happen if they mixed that up, or if they took 1 too many. Who are you calling tonight if you take 1 too many? Or maybe you forget, Mr. Speaker. You take the medication, you forget I took it. You call your pharmacist. Oh, what do I have to worry about? Well, nothing, or a great deal. Or you need to take this to counteract that. It's huge, Mr. Speaker. We don't really understand, I don't think, totally the role that the pharmacists play in our communities. Now, obviously, in a community like mine, I have, as I said, there are 4, and we have a need for every one of them because we're busy enough and we service a big enough area that we need that many, because these folks have all appeared to be successful. Now, mind you, 2 of them are in the grocery store chain, not quite as big, have a pharmacist or 2 working there. And then we have the Lawtons, big store, Lawtons in Windsor, and we have the Pharmacy, which is a fair-sized store as well, and they all have their clientele, Mr. Speaker. And obviously the need is there, as I said, for this number. none of which we can afford any losses at. So quite simply, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I'm not pleased at all to be here standing talking about an amendment to a bill that seems so simple that should never have even been put forward because it should never have been needed. Mr. Speaker, it should have just been obvious that it would be fair to pharmacists across this province to sit down and say it makes sense to have an agreement in place as to how we're going to do this before we, pull the carpet out from under you. There seems to be a pattern here, as we've heard before as well. Why would you do that? Why would you just upset the apple cart in this case, for lack of a better term, Mr. Speaker? Why not have in place what we're saying is going to be a fair agreement? Well, then if it's going to be a fair agreement, put it in place, no problem, and bring this legislation forward when the time is right, whether that's fall, whether that's 3 months, whether it's 2 months. I think there'd be any member, take a month, take 2 months, take 3 months, take 4 months. You, Mr. Speaker, have the right to call this House back on given notice, as you are more than well aware. If the government wants to come back to work in this House, we're happy to come back anytime, especially in the importance of bills like this. We have nothing more important than representing the good constituents of the province of Nova Scotia that we represent. They're important to us, and on bills like this, they're very important to us, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell you for one that this caucus, and I'm sure every member of this House, would come back to work any day to make sure that people are being treated fairly in this province. And we can't stress that enough, Mr. Speaker, and I guess, we've heard an awful lot on it. We could spend a lot of time talking about it, and those are just a few points that I want to make today on this particular issue through this amendment. We do support the amendment. We want to continue to talk. I guess we're going to talk as long as we need to on this, as far as I know. Members, it's important that they have their say, make their plea, ask the government to support the amendment because it makes sense. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure I'll be back in third reading on it again, and whenever need be, to continue to support this thing all the way through. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place.
The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise in my place today and speak to the amendment to Bill 17, and to speak from the perspective of a member who represents a very rural part of Nova Scotia. And I do want to begin my comments by saying that I listened with interest to the comments made by the minister, and I believe she presented a very passionate and caring message. I believe she's sincere in what she's saying. I know from her past life that she is well aware of and very respectful of pharmacists, and in particular the role that they play in the whole picture of health care in this province. Now that she has the responsibility as a minister, I believe that will be an asset when she makes some of the decisions, and there are tough decisions that she has to make. I understand that, and I acknowledge her commitment to doing what is in the best interest of Nova Scotians with respect to health care. Having added the component to her portfolio of wellness, I think is really where I want to focus today, because the responsibility that we all have to ensure that Nova Scotians are well and healthy is one of the first things that we have to do to be proactive and take some time, and it will take some time, to get a healthy population, because it's a lot less costly to maintain a healthy population than it is to respond to one that is not. And so those two portfolios coming together, the minister's understanding of the big picture and her understanding of the key players in that model for health care is important, and she spoke to that, and she spoke to the role that pharmacists play. So I believe that she has in her capacity and in her understanding to make good decisions with respect to this particular bill. We sat through law amendments, and I listened to many of the people who were there as presenters. And their ask was fairly simple, and it was one that is not going to cost, but is eventually going to pay off. And those requests were simply that we would not move forward with Bill 17 until a few of the details had been put in place. One of those was the terms and conditions of the agreement that is in the negotiation stage right now. They were asking to make sure that that was completed before we moved on with Bill 17. And they were asking that the details on the scope of practice would be outlined so that everyone who was participating in the negotiations or anybody who would be living with the implementation of the bill would have a clear understanding of the rules of the game. So, as I said, their ask was simple. I did read where the minister herself had talked about the passage of the bill and the completing of the negotiations would coincide. And I believe the minister said that because she would understand how important it is to pharmacists to know the playing field and to know that they were that they were working together with a common goal. And she made the statement. I think pharmacists were very happy with that. We know that in negotiations there can be some delays, and we know that there have been in this set of negotiations. And so the amendment that was put forward was simply to say to the minister, to say to the pharmacists, and to say to everyone who will benefit from this bill that we need some time so that the coinciding that the minister talked about as being important and what she wanted could happen. I'm a little concerned as to why the minister's position might have changed on that, and I'm hoping that the minister will see this as an opportunity, this amendment as an opportunity for her to do exactly what she said she wanted to do, and that was have the negotiations and the passage of the bill come together. And, you know, it's a small ask on the part of our caucus. It's supported by the members of the third party, and it's supported by the people who asked. All of those who came to law amendments were asking that simple question: what is the rush? Can we wait? And I know that there are members in the thank you, member. I appreciate that. Thank you to the member and thank you to the speaker. I will now continue. What I was saying was that the amendments that were presented will allow the minister to do what I believe she wanted to do, and she went out and took a position on that. And it is what the simple ask that came from the presenters was to delay until those things could come together. It's the request of our caucus through the amendment. It's supported by the members of the third party. And I believe that there will be members in all parties in this House who would recognize there will be nothing lost by waiting for that to happen. There will be a lot to gain. And I would think that the minister would want to be on the side of a winning decision, a winning position, so that the pharmacists know the rules of the game. The minister and the negotiating team will have hammered out what it is that will be in that agreement, that tariff agreement. The scope of practice for pharmacists will be clearly defined, and so people, once they know that, will be able to move forward. Now, that takes me to small communities and small pharmacies, and I will speak specifically to the benefit to the pharmacy in my constituency in Colchester North, in fact in Bass River, the benefit for that pharmacy and for that pharmacist. And the only benefit for the pharmacist is that he will know whether he can continue to open the doors and provide the service or not. And any pharmacist is an entrepreneur as well. And he has made a decision that he will buy that pharmacy. He has made the decision that he will invest everything he has in order to buy that pharmacy and take a loss financially initially so that he can go in and provide that service. But there's not a very big profit margin. In fact, I don't expect there's any profit margin there right now. And so pushing through this bill with the unknowns is something that he is not able to, he will not be able to survive. And so I know that the minister has said that there are protected pharmacies. And I commend the minister for sitting down to look at the impact that this bill will have on some of our rural communities. And out of that review, I understand there has been a list of protected pharmacies. We have asked for that list. We've not seen that list. We've asked for what is the plan to help those rural pharmacies. We've not seen that. So if those lists have been prepared and if the plan has been developed, I don't know why we couldn't see it, but that was the decision of the minister, and I will respect that. But my point is, if they have not been, if she's not shared it because she doesn't have it, then this amendment allows time for that to happen, so that pharmacies in rural Nova Scotia who may be on the protected list and who may be given some assistance so that they can survive, they need to know that. And if, in fact, the minister doesn't have that, this gives her time to get it together. We asked in law amendments of some of those rural pharmacies if they knew of a protected list, and they had heard there was one, but they didn't know. We asked them specifically if they were on that list, and they didn't know. So the anxiety and the unknown that's out there is causing a lot of turmoil in small rural communities. I heard the member from Hants West speak about 4 pharmacies, I believe it was, in his particular area. And I think that's wonderful. It's a much larger area than what I represent. And even that member has concerns about what will happen when there are 4 in the community. People have a choice. They have 4 choices. Well, along the shore between Truro and Parsbro, they have 1 choice. And if that 1 choice is gone, I spoke about this before, if that 1 choice is gone, the people in those communities have a bigger choice to make. And that is, do they pay extra in gas to drive to Truro or Parsbro? Many of them are seniors, so they don't drive, so they hire someone to take them to Truro or Parsbro. Those are added costs which will soon be eaten up from any of the savings that might come out of this bill. But my bigger concern is they will not go anywhere. They will not, and many of them can't afford to hire someone to drive them to Truro or Parsbro. So they will not go. And they will not do, as I suggested in the beginning, and as something I know the minister wants, is that we have to get a healthy population. And if we don't provide services close to home for our residents, and in particular our seniors, they will not take care of their health the way we would want them to, and that would be in a proactive way. And the services that I'm speaking about that allow these folks in my community and others to be cognizant of their health and to have educational programs that will help them understand their illness or their disease, if they don't have that opportunity, which is now provided, Mr. Speaker, through the local pharmacy. It's the focal point. It's where residents come for their blood collection. They come there for the foot clinics. They come there for counseling. They come there for awareness and information sessions on any disease that you can imagine. And it's education, and it's constructive, and it leads to healthier Nova Scotians. And my fear for my constituents, as I've stated, is that if the pharmacy is not on the protected list, if the pharmacist can't participate in the plan that's being prepared, or we hear it's being prepared, then they will lose that opportunity and their health will decline. quickly. And I know that I'm not the only member in this House who represents some very rural communities. And I would expect there are members on that side of the House and on this who, if they wanted to take the name Bass River out and put their own community in, they would look at that and they would say, gee, that could happen in my community as well. If that little pharmacy along the eastern shore is gone, or if that little pharmacy up in the highlands of Cape Breton is gone, if it's gone, where will those people go? Where will your constituents go? Where will my constituents go? And I know that you want the best for everyone in your community. And one of the ways to get that best is to ensure that they have access to somebody who can give them some advice and give them some counseling about their own personal health. You know, I grew up in Bass River. I know what it's like to be there in the middle of February in a blazing blizzard, and probably the roads aren't plowed, and no offense to the member who's the minister, but probably the roads aren't plowed at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you have a sick baby. What do? Well, we heard many, many times in law amendments that the phone that rings is the pharmacist, it's the druggist, it's the one who gets called. And sometimes it's just a matter of talking that family through a difficult and perhaps, quite a traumatic situation. So the services that are there cannot be, there can be no price tag put on those. There can be no replacement for those. Many of those communities, and again, I will refer to mine, the existence of the pharmacy there depends very much on the existence of the doctor in the community, and vice versa. When the doctor is gone, the pharmacy will be gone. When the pharmacy is gone, the doctor will be gone. So we're not only losing a pharmacy if that particular owner can't survive, the doctor who has made a decision to practice there in the same building, through the same door as the pharmacy, will be left alone. And I talked earlier about entrepreneurial spirit here that these pharmacists have. They have to make money. And the only way they can make money is if they have, for priority, prescriptions to fill. And for the doctor, if you're going to drive 40 minutes to get to a doctor, and then you have to turn around and drive another 40 minutes or 50 minutes or whatever to get to a pharmacist, you're not going to do it. And so the pharmacist and the doctor in those small communities coexist. Neither one of them are becoming rich, I can tell you that. But they have chosen that lifestyle and they want to make a good living. They both employ people in the community. So we're not only looking at the health and wellness of the people in the community, and we're not only looking at the viability of the pharmacy, we are looking at a community. And we are looking at destroying what has been able to survive in that community if we don't identify them as protected pharmacies. And what this amendment is doing, Mr. Speaker, is asking people, asking the minister, asking the government, asking the members of the backbench to think about their community and to think, if we wait until the tariff agreement is finalized, until the scope of practice is defined, and then pass the bill, a short period of time, a small price to pay for the win-win situation that can come out of this. And so I would close by saying that I would ask the minister to maintain the position that she took. She made that statement publicly. I would ask her to honor that, to respect that. People were comforted by that, and to allow the amendment to pass so we can have those things coincide, which she had said she wants and which I believe everyone in this House wants as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too am pleased to rise in support of this amendment, and I also want to echo the words of my colleague from Hants West when he said it's too bad it even had to come to this, that we have to stand up in support of an amendment that should be in place anyway. Mr. Speaker, it's been mentioned by all the speakers before me that this amendment that the honourable member has presented just puts into law what the minister says she already plans to do. And over the course of the last few days, we heard from pharmacists and pharmacy owners from across the province. Their concerns, not with this bill, but with the uncertainty that would be created until a tariff agreement is in place. You know, I don't think there's anyone in this chamber or anywhere in this province that's against the bill. We all want fair prices and cheaper prices for our residents. We've been saying this all along. The Liberal Party has been saying it all along. And each presenter at Law Amendment said the same thing. But when some of the pharmacists were asked if they felt a tariff agreement could be in place by July 1st, they said they weren't entirely certain. And then we find out that the talks that were scheduled to take place this past week were postponed until next week, further delaying the possible implementation by July 1st. And I think the pharmacy owners and indeed I'm sure the government wants to make sure that there is sufficient time to discuss any tariff agreement so that the best interest of the pharmacies, the pharmacists and the government are served. But with postponements taking place and the ability to sit down and negotiate not happening, this further delays the whole process and leaves everything in limbo. Mr. Speaker, until a tariff agreement is in place, the pharmacies are faced with uncertainty. They're beginning to look at whether or not many of the services that they provide today, for free will be curtailed or even eliminated altogether. Mr. Speaker, during law amendments again, we heard from Chelsea Hatcher. And Chelsea is the owner of Hatcher's Pharmacave in Neils Harbour. And along with being the only pharmacy in the North of Smoky area of Victoria County, the free services and advice that Chelsea has offered to her clients, her customers, whatever name you want to put on them, could never have a dollar figure affixed to it. We also heard from Evelyn Williams of Ingonish, who said that she doesn't know what she would do if Hatcher's Pharmacave in Neils Harbour were to close. And I think the honourable member from Colchester North mentioned it as well. How many people like Evelyn Williams are going to say, I don't have a pharmacy in my area, I don't have the transportation to get to pick up my prescription? How many are actually going to do without? I think in rural and remote parts of this province, there are many. And I think that's what we have to look at, Mr. Speaker, is the people that the 52 of us in this House are serving. We have to serve their best interest, but we also have to serve the interests of the people that look after their health. You know, oftentimes, Mr. Speaker, pharmacists are the front line in healthcare. And again, this was referenced many times in law amendments as well. They get calls any time of the day or night. And I guess the importance of a small rural pharmacy, and I'll keep referencing Hatcher's in Neils Harbour, is that they know their customers well. Why do they know their customers well? Because they're their neighbours. They know their past medical history and know whether or not a medication that has been prescribed for them is the right medication they should be taking. And when I talk about the North of Smoky area with one pharmacy, a small hospital and 2 doctors, and those doctors that are serving the Buchanan Memorial Hospital in Neils Harbor have served the people for years and have served them very well. But because of the fact that we have a pharmacy in a small rural area, the pharmacist knows the doctors very well because they've been there that long, and they work together to serve the best interests of the community. I also want to reference Graham McKenzie, who owns Stone's Drugstore in Baddeck. We received emails from Graham, not one, but several, who, although he couldn't make it to appear at law amendments, certainly made his feelings known to our caucus, and I'm sure the other caucuses in this chamber. I had the opportunity a week ago last Saturday, to stop in Stone's Drugstore and have a chat with Graham McKenzie. Graham has just finished doing a renovation to his store. It's a beautiful job, but the reason he did it was in order for him to be able to provide the expanded scope of service that our pharmacies are going to be providing. I think in our discussion, Graham told me that had he known that this uncertainty would be taking place, he's not really sure if he would have done the tremendous expansion that he did. But he has an obligation. He has a commitment to his customers. That's why he's doing what he's doing. But he can only go so far. One email, Graham even says, the free services that I am providing, I probably just won't be providing them anymore. So who is the loser, Mr. Speaker, in all this? Who is the speaker? Who's the, Mr. Speaker, who's the loser? The customer. I can hear some rambling going on the opposite side there, Mr. Speaker. I think they should talk to the small rural pharmacies in their area, see what effect it's going to have on them and on their customers, and let them go to the residents and say, sorry, you're not going to have a pharmacy anymore. I'd like to see the member from Pictou Centre do that. I'd like to see the member from Pictou East do it. Let's see them do it. Have the audacity to go and tell somebody, sorry folks, your drugstore is closing. Let's see what would happen. So, Mr. Speaker, we all know the importance of a pharmacy. We know how important a pharmacy is, whether it's Chelsea Hatcher in Neils Harbor or it's the Shoppers Drug Mart here in Halifax. We know the importance of it. We all agree to it. We all want fair prices. But let's slow down. Let's make sure that there is a good agreement in place, that the tremendous job that these pharmacists and the pharmacies are providing to the residents of Nova Scotia can continue, and the best interests of the people of Nova Scotia are served. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to speak today to the motion that is before us, in part because while I don't live in a rural area, I am very concerned about the ability of seniors to access pharmacies, the various services that pharmacies do offer, and I'm concerned about them being able to get deliveries. I'm concerned that any move that will close pharmacies will further depopulate our small towns. And I'm concerned because, in my view, this is another attack on small businesses. Pharmacists have indicated quite plainly to us that this could well lead to more closures of pharmacies in